My name is Elena Blackwell. I'm 37 years old. And until 4 years ago, I believed betrayal would be loud, messy, explosive enough that even if it shattered your life, you'd at least have the dignity of knowing exactly when it happened. A slammed door, a raised voice, a moment you could point to and say, there. That's when everything ended. I was wrong, because the worst kind of betrayal doesn't arrive like a storm. It doesn't knock things over. It doesn't even look guilty. It walks into your home like it belongs there. It smiles at you across the dinner table. It asks if you want coffee in the morning. And then it quietly rewrites your entire life behind your back. Monday mornings used to feel safe, predictable, comforting in the way routines always are. Daniel would kiss me on his way out the door. Soft, familiar, automatic. I'll be back around 6, he'd say, grabbing his keys. And I'd nod, barely looking up from my coffee, already thinking about my schedule, my meetings, the grocery list in my head. We were stable. That was our thing. He was the easy one. Charming, relaxed, the kind of man who made strangers feel like old friends. And me? I made things work. I planned. I organized. I held everything together. That included the hardest part of our life at the time, the thing we didn't talk about with anyone else. We had been trying for a baby for 14 months. 14 months of appointments. 14 months of quiet disappointment. 14 months of pretending we were fine when we weren't. Daniel hated needles. So I learned. I practiced injections on oranges until my hands stopped shaking. Every morning at 6 a.m., I would sit on the edge of the bed and inject hormones into my own stomach while he looked away, apologizing softly like it was his fault. I told him it wasn't. I told him we were in this together. I believed that. God, I believed that. My younger sister, Lila, had moved in with us in January. Same story every family tells themselves when they want to feel generous. She'd lost her job, got evicted, needed help. And I said yes, because she was my sister. Because I thought that word meant something. Because I thought blood came with boundaries. She stayed in our guest room, a temporary solution that slowly stopped feeling temporary. By March, something had already shifted. I just didn't know it yet. At 6 a.m., I was injecting hormones into my body. At 6:15 a.m., Lila was texting Daniel. Every morning. For 7 months. I didn't know that then. I only learned the timeline later, when everything had already collapsed. I found out in the least dramatic way possible. No screaming. No confrontation. No cinematic moment. Just a trash can. A pregnancy test. Positive. I remember the exact feeling. That sharp, overwhelming burst of joy. 90 seconds. That's how long it lasted. 90 seconds where I thought, finally. 14 months of trying. 14 months of hope. It worked. I ran downstairs, heart racing, already imagining how I'd tell Daniel, already picturing his face, already building a future that didn't exist. The garage door was slightly open, and I heard Lila's voice, soft, calm, almost casual. It's positive, she said. A pause. Then, we need to figure out what to tell Elena. The timing works. She'll think it's hers. There are moments in your life where something inside you doesn't break. It just stops. Like a clock that decides it's done keeping time. I stood there, in the hallway, listening. Every word landing quietly, like snow covering something already dead. No yelling, no denial. Just logistics. Planning. As if my life was a problem they needed to solve. I didn't confront them. That's the part people never understand. I didn't storm into the garage. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I walked back upstairs, sat on the edge of my bed, and stared at my hands. The same hands that had been steady enough to inject hormones every morning. The same hands that had built a life for 3 people, without realizing 2 of them were tearing it apart. That night I called my parents. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just told them. Dad, I said when he picked up, Lila has been sleeping with Daniel for 7 months. She's pregnant. It's his. They were going to let me believe it was mine. Silence. Then, Elena, are you sure? I closed my eyes. I heard her say it, I'm sure. My mother got on the phone. Her voice was softer. Careful. The way people sound when they're already choosing their words over your pain. This is devastating, she said. But we need to think about this carefully. Lila has been doing so well lately. She's stable for the first time in years. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was so absurd my brain didn't know what else to do. She's stable because she's living in my house, I said. Eating my food, sleeping with my boyfriend. That's not stability, I continued. That's theft. My father sighed. Let's not use words like that. This is family. People make mistakes. I felt something inside me shift, not break. Just move. 7 months isn't a mistake, I said quietly. That's a pattern. Then my mother said the sentence that ended everything. There's a baby coming, she said. We have to think about the baby. Not me. Not what was done to me. The baby. I swallowed. The baby is theirs, I said, not mine. If you want to think about the baby, tell them to take responsibility for it. We're asking you to be the bigger person, my father added. There it was. That phrase. The one that always means the same thing. I gave them a choice. I gave them a choice. One simple, impossible choice. If you don't tell Lila what she did was wrong, I said, you lose me tonight. Silence. Then my mother's voice, sharp now. Don't give us ultimatums. Then act like my parents, I said. They didn't call her. Not that night. Not the next morning. They called everyone else. Each other. Their pastor. My aunt. Discussing my anger. Managing my reaction. Solving the wrong problem. 24 hours later, I called back. Did you tell her she was wrong? A pause. We talked to her, my mother said carefully. She's sorry. Did you tell her she was wrong? Another pause. We said the situation was hurtful. I hung up. That was the moment everything actually ended. Not the affair, not the pregnancy, not the betrayal, but the realization that I was alone, not because I had no family, but because none of them chose me. Within 2 hours, I changed my number. Within 4, I packed my car. I left the house keys on the kitchen counter, right next to the pregnancy test, and I drove 1,200 miles, away from everything I thought was mine. I didn't cry. Not on the road. Not when I crossed state lines. Not when I stopped for gas at 3 a.m. I just drove, because stopping meant feeling, and feeling meant breaking, and I wasn't ready to do that yet. I arrived in Denver 2 days later with $1,400, a truck, and nothing else. No family, no home, no past I was willing to carry with me. Just the beginning of something I hadn't chosen. At 11 p.m. on a Wednesday, my friend Niles picked me up at a gas station. He looked at me for a long moment, then said, "You look like someone who just drove through a wall." I shook my head. "I drove through a family," I said. "The wall would have been easier." I didn't know it yet, but that was the first honest thing I'd said since everything fell apart. And it wouldn't be the last. The first 6 weeks in Denver didn't feel like the beginning of a new life. They felt like survival with furniture. Niles had a brown corduroy couch that sagged in the middle and made my back ache every morning. But I loved that couch more than I had loved anything in months because it didn't ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. It just held me. That was more kindness than my family had offered in the end. Niles lived in a second-floor apartment above a dry cleaner's on a street that always smelled faintly like detergent and rain. At night, I'd lie awake listening to pipes hum in the walls, staring at a ceiling fan that clicked once every rotation, and tell myself the same thing over and over. You left. You survived. Now keep going. There is a particular kind of grief that comes after betrayal, when the betrayal is complete enough to steal not just your partner, but your place in the family. It's not dramatic every day. Sometimes it's just practical. It's standing in a grocery store trying to decide whether buying your own coffee creamer counts as freedom or loneliness. It's realizing no one knows where you are. It's understanding that if you disappeared again, maybe nobody would come looking. I found a job at an engineering firm 6 weeks after I got there. $74,000 a year, less than what I had made back home, but enough to stop feeling like I was dangling over open air with one hand slipping. The office was clean and quiet. Gray carpets, glass conference rooms, people who said things like circle back and bandwidth in meetings and had no idea they were standing next to a woman who had detonated her entire life and was trying to look normal in business casual. I became very good at looking normal. That's one of the least romantic truths about heartbreak. You still answer emails. You still refill the printer paper. You still sit in meetings and nod at quarterly forecasts while your old life replays and flashes so sharp they feel like they're happening behind your eyes. By the end of month 2, I found a studio apartment for $950 a month. It was small. One window, a kitchen barely wide enough for one person to turn around in. The bathroom light buzzed if I left it on too long. But it was mine. Every fork in the drawer was mine. Every towel on the rack was mine. Every inch of silence belonged to me. The first night there, I sat cross-legged on the floor eating takeout out of a cardboard container because I didn't own a table yet, and I cried for the first time since leaving. Not because I missed Daniel, not because I missed Lila, but because no one in that apartment could betray me. The emptiness felt cleaner than company. My family tried everything during that first year. My mother called Niles. He told me afterward while leaning against my kitchen counter, eating crackers straight from the sleeve like it was ordinary conversation. She cried, he said. I was washing dishes. That sounds like her. She said, "He's my daughter." I dried my hands slowly. "And what did you say?" Niles looked at me, and there was no performance in his face, just loyalty, plain and unadorned. I said, "Then you should have chosen her when she asked you to." I stared at him. Then I nodded once, because that was all I could manage. My father drove to my old job, trying to find out where I'd gone. My former boss told him I had resigned and said, from what I heard later, I'm not a forwarding service. Lila texted my old number dozens of times before it was disconnected. Daniel sent letters to the house I'd left behind. The new tenants marked them returned to sender. Someone hired a private investigator within 6 months. I found that out through Niles, who somehow always knew things without seeming to go looking for them. The investigator found my city but not my address because I had put the utilities under an abbreviated version of my name and left no straight trail back to me. For once in my life, distance felt like dignity. And still, even with all of that, the anger didn't leave. That surprised me. I thought once I got away it would shrink, fade, turn into something manageable. But grief is not a house guest. It does not politely take the hint and leave because you change zip codes. It settles in, quietly. It learns the floor plan. Some nights I would wake up at 2:13 a.m. and remember the exact sound of Lila's voice in the garage saying, "The timing works." Other nights I'd remember my father saying, "Be the bigger person," and something in my chest would go cold all over again. People think the opposite of love is hate. It isn't. The opposite of love is indifference. And I wasn't there yet. I wasn't done with them. I was just done letting them reach me. Year 2 was the first time my life started to look like something I had chosen instead of something I had crawled into after a fire. I got promoted to senior engineer, $92,000 a year, enough to move into a one-bedroom apartment with real walls and a dining nook and a balcony, barely big enough for 2 chairs I bought secondhand. I bought furniture slowly, on purpose. A couch first, then a bed frame, then a bookshelf, then a table. Each piece felt ceremonial. Proof. This chair is mine. This lamp is mine. This life is mine. No one else sat on my couch without my permission. No one else slept in my bed unless I wanted them there. No one opened my refrigerator and acted like my kindness was an entitlement. That year I found out the baby had been born. A boy. I didn't hear it from family, of course not. I heard it through Niles, who heard it from a mutual friend who still knew people back home. They named her son Owen, he said one evening, setting down 2 coffees on my table like he was reporting weather. I looked at the steam rising from the cup and felt almost nothing at first. Then came the second wave. Not sadness, not exactly. Something stranger. The ache of almost being tricked into a life that would have looked loving from the outside and hollowed me from the inside. I could have been calling that child mine. I could have been at doctor visits, nursery shopping, midnight feedings, all while everyone around me held the truth like a private joke. I sat with that thought for a long time. Niles watched me quietly, then said, "You okay?" "No," I said, "but I'm relieved." He nodded, like that made perfect sense. Because it did. The next part came later. My parents were helping Lila and Daniel pay for an apartment. $1,600 a month. My parents, who had told me to forgive and move on, were now underwriting the domestic life of the 2 people who had detonated mine. I remember laughing when I heard that. Not from amusement. From the sheer ugliness of how predictable it was. Of course they were helping them. There was a grandchild now. And children have a way of laundering other people's sins in the eyes of families desperate to keep their own stories intact. By year 3, the sharpest edge of my grief had dulled enough that other people started seeing me as available again. Not vulnerable. Not fragile. Just present. That's when I met Adrian. He wasn't dramatic. That was the first thing I noticed. He didn't crowd a room. Didn't charm for sport. He was a physical therapist with steady hands, a dry sense of humor, and the kind of directness that felt almost suspicious after the life I'd come from. He said what he meant, and then he meant it. We started dating in March. Coffee first, then dinner, then weekends that stretched longer without trying. For months, I told him almost nothing about my family. Not because he pressured me, because he didn't. He had this infuriatingly patient way of waiting for truth instead of demanding it. One night in September, we were sitting on my balcony, eating Thai takeout from white containers balanced on our knees. City lights flickering below us, when he looked at me and said, "You disappear whenever people mention sisters." I smiled without humor. "That specific, huh?" "That specific." I looked down at my food. Then I told him everything. Daniel, Lila, the pregnancy, the phone call to my parents, the word ultimatum thrown at me like I was the one destroying the family instead of the one begging it to have a spine, the drive, the couch, the silence after. When I finished, Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You drove 1,200 miles instead of burning the house down. That's either discipline or grief." I looked at him. "Both," I said. He leaned back in his chair. "Are you still angry?" I answered too fast. "No." He raised an eyebrow. I exhaled. "Yes." He nodded once. "That makes more sense." I laughed then, genuinely, maybe because he didn't make anger sound ugly. He made it sound honest. I'm done with them, I told him. He studied me in that calm way of his. You're done with them. You're not done with what they did. And there it was. The truth I had been living around. The feeling lives in a different room than the decision. You can leave people behind and still be haunted by the shape they left in you. That winter, Adrian started leaving things at my place. A toothbrush first, then a sweater, then coffee beans he liked better than mine. He never asked to move in. He just became part of the rhythm of my life in a way that felt natural instead of invasive. No secrets, no decoding, no strange silences that made me wonder what I had missed. With him, calm didn't feel like avoidance. It felt like peace. And yet even in peace, the past kept moving somewhere out of sight. I heard things through Niles over time, not because I asked him to monitor my family, but because he believed information was better than surprise. Lila and Daniel split, he told me one afternoon. I blinked. When? Months ago. She left him. For who? He shrugged. Someone else, apparently. I stared at him, then shook my head slowly. There was something almost biblical about that kind of pattern. Destruction repeating itself until it finally consumed the people who thought they could manage it. She took Owen with her, filed for child support. Daniel was barely making enough to keep his own life together, let alone support anyone else. And Lila? Lila moved back in with our parents. Back to the same house. Back to the same room. Back to the same gravity that had excused her all her life. My parents' finances started straining under the weight of all the rescue missions they kept funding. Rent, legal fees, car repairs, groceries, utilities, insurance. All of it poured into the child they had chosen over me, because choosing her had become their identity. You can build a whole life around protecting the wrong person. And by the time you realize it, the cost is unbearable. Still, I stayed where I was. I worked. I loved Adrian. I built. And little by little, I became someone who no longer flinched every time my phone rang. Someone who could go a full day without thinking about the garage. Someone who could look at her own reflection and see not the woman abandoned by her family, but the woman who survived them. That was the real rebirth. Not moving. Not the job. Not the apartment. The moment I stopped measuring my worth by who had failed to love me correctly. By the end of year 4, I was making $140,000 as a contractor. I bought a house, 3 bedrooms, $340,000. I put down $85,000 and signed every page with a hand that did not shake. Adrian moved in so gradually, it felt more like the house recognized him than I invited him. One weekend, he brought over a box of kitchen things and forgot to take it home. Then he brought books. Then his running shoes. Then one Sunday morning, I opened a drawer and realized half of it was his. I stood there smiling to myself, not because I had found love again, but because this time it had entered my life without deceit, without hunger, without theft, just truth. I thought maybe that was the end of the story. Not a neat ending, but enough. A life rebuilt, a wound scarred over, a family left in the distance where they belonged. I thought the people who had thrown me away were finally behind me. I was wrong, because ruin has a way of circling back when it needs something. And 4 years after I disappeared, my family found a new reason to remember I existed. The message came on a Tuesday afternoon. Not from my mother, not from my father, from Niles. Simple, direct, the way he always delivered information that mattered. Your sister's in the hospital, kidneys, serious. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. Not because I didn't understand the words, because I understood them immediately. Too clearly. There are certain phrases that carry weight even before you process them. Kidneys, serious. I typed back. Thanks for telling me. 3 dots appeared. Then, you going to call? I didn't hesitate. No, that was 5 months ago. At the time, it felt like information, not a turning point. Just another update about a life I no longer belonged to. But illness has a way of escalating quietly. First, it's serious. Then it's chronic. Then it's progressing. And then one day, it becomes unavoidable. Stage 3 turned into stage 4. Dialysis began. 3 times a week. 4 hours per session. Machines doing the work her body couldn't anymore. Niles kept me updated in fragments, like weather reports I didn't ask for but needed to hear anyway. Looks bad. Lost weight. Skin's yellow. She's exhausted. I read every message. I responded to almost none of them. The call came on a Thursday. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Almost. Something in me, curiosity maybe, or instinct, made me pick up. Hello? Silence. Then, Elena? My body went still. 4 years. 4 years without hearing that voice. And somehow I recognized it instantly. Mom, I said. Not warm. Not cold. Just accurate. She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for years. Elena, thank God. I've been trying to find you. I know, I cut in. You tried 4 years ago, too. A pause. Then she pushed forward, like she hadn't heard me. Lila is dying. Straight to it. No apology. No acknowledgement. No bridge. Just need. I leaned back in my chair. I know. Silence. You know? She asked. Niles told me 5 months ago. Another pause. Longer this time. You've known for 5 months, she said slowly, and you didn't call? I let out a quiet breath. Why would I call? The question hung there, heavy, uncomfortable. True. She could die, my mother said. People die, I replied. That's not new information. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything she didn't want to say, everything she didn't know how to fix. And then she said it, the real reason for the call. The transplant coordinator ran family records, she said carefully. You're a match. There it was. Not we miss you. Not we're sorry. Not we were wrong. Just, you're compatible. I closed my eyes. How do they have my medical records? A hesitation. I submitted your childhood files, she admitted. From Dr. Linwood, the pediatric records. I sat up. You submitted my medical history to a transplant program without my knowledge or consent? I was trying to help your sister. No, I said quietly. You were trying to use me. She inhaled sharply. That's not fair. It's exactly fair, I cut in. You didn't call me because Lila is dying. You called because I'm useful. Her voice cracked. That's not true. I didn't raise mine. Didn't need to. If I wasn't a match, I asked, would you have called? Silence. I pressed. If my blood type didn't line up, if the tissue markers didn't match, would you have called just to tell me she was sick? Nothing. No answer. Because we both knew. They didn't want Elena. They wanted Elena's kidney. My father called the next morning. Different tone. Same goal. Elena, he said, voice steady, controlled. I'm going to be direct. Lila is dying. You're a match. We need you to come home and get tested. No. One word. Clean. Immediate. He paused. Elena. No. She's your sister. She was my sister when she slept with my boyfriend for 7 months, I said. She was my sister when she got pregnant and planned to let me raise her child. She was my sister when you told me to forgive her and be the bigger person. My voice didn't rise, but something in it hardened. She was my sister then, and none of you chose me. Silence. Then, you'd let her die? He asked. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. I'm not letting her die, I said. Her kidneys are failing. Her choices led here. I'm just choosing not to fix it. That's cold. I let out a small, humorless breath. Cold is telling your daughter to forgive the woman who destroyed her life, I said. Cold is paying for the sister who betrayed me while I was rebuilding from nothing. Cold is submitting my medical records without asking me. I paused. You wrote the definition. I'm just repeating it. He hung up. Then the campaign started. It was almost impressive. Coordinated. Relentless. My aunt called. Elena, I know you're hurt, but Lila is dying. You can't let anger kill your sister. Anger isn't killing her, I said. Kidney failure is. My cousin called. She looks really bad. You should at least visit. So they can trap me in a room with doctors and consent forms, I replied. I know how this works. He sighed. That's harsh. I didn't soften. So was what she did to me. Then they crossed a line I didn't expect. My mother called Adrian. She found him through social media. Called the clinic where he worked. Told the receptionist it was a family emergency. They patched her through. Adrian told me that night, while we stood in the kitchen, the smell of garlic and butter still hanging in the air from dinner. She said, you're the only match, he told me, that you're refusing, that I should convince you. I went very still. What did you say? He didn't hesitate. I said your decision is yours, he replied. And if she wants you to reconsider, she should start by acknowledging why you left. I looked at him, really looked at him, and something inside me settled deeper into place. He wasn't just kind, he was solid. My mother hung up on him. Of course she did. Then came the pastor. Of course there was a pastor. Forgiveness, he said. Mercy. A life is at stake. I listened. Then I answered. 4 years ago, my life was at stake, I said. My marriage, my family, my sanity. No one from your church called me then. Silence. Then something about grace. I cut him off. I'll keep my kidney, I said, and my boundaries. He didn't call again. That should have been the end of it. It should have been enough. But it wasn't. Because something in me shifted. Not toward forgiveness. Not toward guilt. Toward something else. Clarity. 4 years ago, I left without saying everything I needed to say. I disappeared, quietly, like the betrayal that forced me to. But silence leaves space. And space fills with assumptions, with narratives, with stories people tell themselves to survive what they've done. I didn't want them telling themselves I had simply moved on. I didn't want Lila believing this was just distance. I didn't want my parents thinking time had softened me into something usable again. So I made a decision, the one that changed everything. I would go back. Not to help, not to donate, but to say no. Out loud, in person, where it couldn't be twisted, or softened, or ignored. Adrian watched me pack a small bag that Thursday morning. You sure? He asked. That's not closure, he added. That's confrontation. I zipped the bag. I've had 4 years of closure, I said. This is confirmation. I booked the flight, rented a car, drove to the hospital. Mercy General, 4th floor, nephrology ward, room 412. My mother was in the hallway. She saw me and broke. Completely. Like relief and desperation had been waiting just beneath her skin. Elena, she started, rushing toward me. I held up a hand. I'm not here for you, I said. She stopped. Stunned. I'm here for Lila, I continued. 5 minutes, then I'm gone. Her face shifted. Relief first. Then confusion. Then something darker. Something like fear. The coordinator, she began. We can go right now. The screening. Mom, she froze. I'm not donating. The words landed. Heavy. Final. Her expression cracked. Not from grief. From realization. I hadn't come back to save anyone. I had come back to end something. I walked into room 412, and for the first time in 4 years, I saw my sister. Lila didn't look like the person I remembered. Not the version of her that laughed too loudly at her own jokes. Not the version that borrowed my clothes without asking and called it sharing. Not the version who stood in my garage, calm and practical, planning how to rewrite my life. This version was smaller, thinner. Her skin had that faint yellow tint that didn't belong to sunlight. Machines surrounded her. Quiet. Rhythmic. Indifferent. There's something unsettling about machines that keep people alive. They don't care who you were or what you did. They just keep going. My father was sitting by the window. He stood up the second he saw me. Elena, he said. Just my name. Like if he said it gently enough, it might undo everything. Sit down, I told him. This won't take long. He hesitated, then sat. I walked to the bed. Lila's eyes were already on me. Wide. Glass-like. Trying to process something her body was too tired to react to properly. Elena, she whispered. My name sounded unfamiliar in her mouth, like something she hadn't earned the right to say. You came. I nodded once. I came to tell you something. Her lips trembled. I know why you're here. Of course she did. Because in their version of this story, there was only one reason I would come back. Usefulness. I spoke before she could say anything else. I am a match, I said. Her eyes filled immediately. Perfect match. Same blood type. Same tissue markers. I could give you a kidney tomorrow and you'd probably survive. Hope is a dangerous thing. It rises too fast. Builds too quickly. She reached for it like it was already hers. Elena, please. No. The word didn't echo. It didn't need to. It landed exactly where it was supposed to. Clean. Sharp. Final. Behind me, I heard my mother's breath catch. My father shifted in his chair. But I didn't look at them. This wasn't for them. Lila stared at me. Confusion first. Then disbelief. Then something that looked like fear. I'm going to die, she said. Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in my chest. Not forgiveness. Not softness. Recognition. Because fear is human, even when the person feeling it isn't someone you can love anymore. Maybe, I said. Calm. Measured. The donor list exists. Dialysis exists. Medicine evolves every year. I held her gaze. You have options. A beat. I'm just not one of them. Why? She asked. It wasn't angry. It wasn't defensive. It was small, like she genuinely didn't understand. And that was the part that almost made me laugh. Why? I repeated. I took a step closer. Because 4 years ago you slept with my boyfriend for 7 months. Her eyes dropped. Because you got pregnant and planned to let me raise your child. Tears slid down her temples into her hair. I didn't stop. Because when I found out and begged our parents to stand with me, they chose you. My voice stayed steady, controlled. That was your moment to stop, to tell the truth, to take responsibility. I shook my head slightly. You didn't. I was scared, she whispered. I know, I said. And you chose yourself anyway. My father stood up. Elena, he said, voice tight, you've made your point. We need to focus on what matters now. I turned slowly. What matters now? He held my gaze. Saving her life. I let out a quiet breath. No, I said. What matters now is that you finally understand the cost of what you chose. My mother stepped forward. How can you do this? She demanded. Her voice was shaking. How can you stand here and say no while your sister is dying? I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in years, I didn't see authority, or comfort, or family. I saw a person who had spent too long justifying the wrong things. The kind of person who says no, I replied, is the one you raised. She flinched. I gave this family everything, I continued. My time, my money, my home. My voice didn't rise, but every word landed heavier than the last. I gave her a place to live. I trusted her. I trusted you. I paused. And when I needed you to choose me, just once, you didn't. My mother's eyes filled. That's not fair. It is, I said. You don't get to rewrite that part. I turned back to Lila. She was crying openly now. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just quiet. Like everything else had been. I'm sorry, she said. I've been sorry every day. I studied her. For a long moment. Then I nodded once. I believe you. Her face lifted. Hope again. Fragile. Immediate. But that doesn't change anything. Hope collapsed. Faster this time. Because now she understood. Sorry doesn't rebuild what you broke, I said. It doesn't undo what you did. And it doesn't entitle you to anything from me. The room went still. Even the machines felt quieter. I stepped back. Not dramatically. Just enough to create space. The kind of space that can't be crossed anymore. I hope you find a donor, I said. And I meant it. Not out of love. Out of something cleaner. I hope you survive this. I met her eyes one last time. But it won't be because of me. My mother reached for my arm as I turned. Elena, please. I gently removed her hand. Not angry. Not rough. Just final. My father said my name. Once. Like a last attempt. I didn't stop. I walked out of the room. Past the nurse's station. Into the elevator. Down to the lobby. Out the front doors. No one followed me. Not this time. The air outside felt different. Lighter. Not because something had been fixed, but because something had been finished. I got into the rental car. Drove to the airport. Boarded the plane. Flew back to Denver. Back to the house I bought. Back to the life I built. Back to Adrian. 3 weeks have passed since that day. My mother calls every day. I don't answer. She leaves voicemails. They change over time. First begging. Then anger. Then something quieter. Something closer to understanding. Last night, Adrian and I had dinner. Salmon. Salad. Simple. Normal. The kind of normal that used to feel impossible. She talked about you as a kid, he said, setting his fork down. I looked up. What did she say? He smiled slightly. She said you used to build things. Legos mostly. You'd take them apart and rebuild them over and over. I exhaled softly. That sounds like her. She said you never cried when something broke, he continued. You just rebuilt. I sat there for a moment, thinking about that. About who I was. About who I became. That's not nostalgia, I said finally. That's regret. Adrian nodded. She knows the difference now. I looked around the kitchen. At the table. At the quiet. At a life with no secrets in it. I'm not the villain in this story, I said. I know, he replied. But you're the only one strong enough to be blamed for it. He was right. The strong one is always the easiest to ask for sacrifice. Because people assume you can survive losing more. But I can't. Not anymore. Not my peace. Not my life. Not pieces of myself carved out to fix something I didn't break. My sister is number 847 on a transplant list. The average wait is years. She might not have that long. Those numbers don't belong to me. 4 years ago, my life fell apart. No one came to save me. No one flew across the country. No one offered pieces of themselves to make me whole again. So I rebuilt. Alone. Piece by piece. And now, for the first time in my life, I chose myself. I said no.